Welcome to the Tech on Toast podcast, where tech meets hospitality and ideas are always served, well, guess what? Fresh. This is the place where we break down the latest in hospitality technology, share stories from industry legends, and explore how to make the impossible, well, possible. But wait, every great podcast needs an even greater sponsor, and we've got one. It's service. Service isn't just an event, it's a movement. And the best part, it's happening on Tuesday, the 4th of February, 2025, at the biggest pub in Europe. That's right, Brewdog Waterloo. Expect inspiring panels, networking on bowling lanes, and a chance to connect with hundreds of hospitality heroes. And did we mention? Yeah, it's free, completely free. Tickets are now available on the website weareservice.co.uk. So grab a coffee or a pint, settle in, and let's dive into all things hospitality, tech, and the incredible people behind it. My name's Chris. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Tech on Toast podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Carl Orsbourn. Now, Carl, you've got many job titles. I'm going to start with the first one. SVP of Invisible, also the co-author of a brilliant book, if you don't know it, Delivering the Digital Restaurant, which I know my friends over in Belgium at Epic Base recently taught you about. Very, very big welcome to you. It's about 4 o'clock here. And what time is it there?
I'm over in California, so it's just after 8 a.m. in the morning.
Okay, we're at the start of Carl's day, so we've got to go easy on him. So, Carl, look, lovely to meet you. Really appreciate you coming on to talk to us. Look, before we get into anything, tell us a little bit about you and how you've ended up in your position. You've got a fascinating background.
Thank you, Chris. Real pleasure to join you and to speak to your audience today. Really kind of odd background in many ways, I have to say. I actually spent, as you can tell, I'm from your part of the world. I spent 18 years with BP, largely in the retail space. So convenience stores in the UK, you'll know the BP, the M&S, Wildbean cafes. A lot of my world was in that type of environment, but also over here in California on the west coast of the US. Did that for about 18 years. And then I wanted to really make a faster impact. You know, when you work for one of these bigger organizations, sometimes innovation's a little slower and you don't get to necessarily impact the world as fast as you perhaps would want. And I always had this thirst for entrepreneurship. So I got involved with a Google Ventures-backed startup called Kitchen United, which was one of the foremost ghost kitchen companies that was starting to roll out the concept of ghost kitchens, dark kitchens, you name it. You know, we've heard them all, right? But yes. In the US, they were one of the first kind of players in that arena. And I came across to help them build out their operating model and to help them scale appropriately. And during that, I met, so many different restaurant executives, big and small, lots of different restaurant technology companies. And the main message to them was, guys, you need to embrace e-commerce. Most of your customers, all of your customers are seeing e-commerce touch their lives in some shape or form from many other verticals. Why isn't this happening in the restaurant space? Why shouldn't it be connected to their food in some way? And I think a lot of folks at that time saw delivery, takeout as a bit of a nice to have, but almost like a stepchild channel of the business. It wasn't something anyone was ever going to really treat seriously. And ghost kitchens, of course, were all about helping them be able to do that more effectively and certainly help a lot of the smaller guys perhaps expand their footprint without having to put 7 figures into a new location. But it was tough. And I said to my co-author, I said, why don't we buy each of our customers, each of our prospects a book to tell them about why this makes so much sense. And she said, great, go for it. And I went onto Amazon, looked at said book, Chris, and the book didn't exist. Fast forward about 6 to 12 months or so, we'd both left Kitchen United, and we ended up writing this book. And then we started touching base with another entity that is a little antiquated in the sense of the publishing industry, because we spoke to a big publishing house. They loved the idea of this book. They said, great, we'll get it out in 2 years. We said, no. we need to get this thing out now. This is happening in the industry right now. And so we went through a hybrid publisher, and then we started writing, and then something started bubbling up in Wuhan, China.
Yeah.
And suddenly all these executives at these restaurant chains, all the tech executives that were trying to be innovative and shape the future for food were suddenly at home trying to build their businesses. And so, over a period of 4 or 5 months, we spoke to 100 or so executives, interviewed them, and we got this book out in the summer of lockdown. And the book came out basically when every restaurant now was a ghost kitchen, when every restaurant, if they wanted to survive, had to embrace e-commerce. And this book, Delivering the Digital Restaurant, was basically their kind of vehicle to help them see why this was important. Now, we've got a second book that came out last year, which is all it's under the same name, but it's called The Path to Digital Maturity, and that was all about trying to help them see the how, the steps to think through it. Because since the pandemic, it's been a little less in the sense of you don't have to do everything all at once. At that time, they were putting everything against the wall, trying to see
Yeah,
what
it was crazy.
Now it's actually, no, let's treat this like a marathon, not a sprint. Anyway, so writing these two books, Chris, was amazing for me because it transformed my personal brand from this, what some people would see as this oil and gas executive guy into someone that can help, reshape the industry from a technology perspective. And so I spent the last few years being on the conference floor, speaking at conferences around the world. Just got back from Japan, actually. I was speaking over there. I have a few advisory roles. I sit on the board of a restaurant group in Saudi Arabia. And since then, I co-founded my own startup in the dynamic pricing space for restaurants. And now today, I work for a company called Invisible, which is it's only been around 9 years or so, but it truly is transforming the way in which AI is impacting many different verticals. I lead the vertical for food, hospitality, and retail. And what we're doing in this company is basically operations as a service. We are helping organizations figure out how they can deploy AI, automation, and offshore labor where it makes sense to help them run their operation in a more efficient way, utilizing a lot of the capabilities that AI can offer. And of course, AI is being thrown around like crazy right now. A lot of people that are probably selling AI solutions to your audience, a lot of it's BS, quite honestly, but the reality is AI is going to change our world, every industry, every vertical. I'm sure it's already affecting everyone that's listening, but in my mind, what this ultimately can help us do is create a better guest experience. And that's why when you invited me on the podcast today, I thought this is going to be great because we get to speak to someone else who's enthusiastic about this concept.
No, it's true. And I think what's super interesting about, you bring up AI there actually, and it's banded around. Literally today, there was another webinar that came out. Someone else is talking about AI. We've got our own little chat bot that does that kind of thing, but it does seem to be consuming, particularly the people space over here. I don't know if that's the same over there, I'm not sure if it's more AI, but more about kind of automation in terms of bringing in lots of compliance documents or recipes into one place so the kids can interrogate that database really quickly. But yeah, AI is definitely a conversation point over here. What do you see as I suppose some of the real benefits? Is it really just saving time or automating things in terms of how AI or automation will impact us over here or over there even?
Well, it'll hit everywhere. Funnily enough, in the first book, we had this chapter called The Maturity of Markets, and we included the UK in that chapter, saying in many ways the UK is actually far more advanced than the US.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Yeah.
And so in that sense, maybe we should check out what's happening in your world before. Having said that, the US is leading, I think, a lot of the AI innovation space, and so it is interesting to see how it is touching. But ultimately, it really depends on the mindset. It depends on the mindset of how you want to use it. So yes, of course, you can use it for productivity. You can help, save time on the day-to-day type of activities. But I think that's just scraping the surface, quite honestly. The way to almost think of this is how can we ultimately help ourselves make better decisions? In the last chapter of The Path to Digital Maturity, I talked about this idea of vertical integration of different systems, of different technologies, different SaaS platforms. And what could that really mean? And the example I used in the book was saying, well, imagine you have that situation. And we've all been there, Chris. I'm sure you saw it all the time at Carluccio's, where you have 2 or 3 people call out for a night. They're your 2 best cooks or something, right? And what happens to them?
Every week.
Every week, right. Yeah, exactly. And so what happens? Typically, the GM has to hustle, right? The general manager has to hustle and figure out a solution. Sometimes it's maybe taking some people from some other locations. Sometimes people that are off, they're calling in, but you make it work. And that's what we love about our general managers in our restaurants. Well, imagine if that decision-making hustle could be taken away from this. Imagine for a moment that actually that very impetus of that information is then transferred to OpenTable, whereby the reservations tonight are reduced. So that way now you know what your throughput is from your kitchen because you've got less capacity to cook as many dishes. So therefore you're able to adjust your reservations. What if this was to transfer to your pricing tools to be able to say, actually, we're going to increase our prices on Deliveroo, or whatever. So that way we just, have some form of way to be able to reduce the demand at that particular point in time. What if this can actually do something in terms of reaching out to their other team members that perhaps do want to come in and earn a bit of extra money? If all of that kind of stuff can help seamlessly in the background without the GM having to pick up the phone or send an email, that could be amazing, right? And so, and that isn't necessarily always the right answer, by the way, but the point is that how we can help our GMs make better decisions based on certain stimuli and certain rules. That's where I think a lot of this capability is going to come to the fore.
And I think that gap after the pandemic, a lot of people left the industry, including me, right? A lot of people who were in operations or whatever kind of moved on into different roles, some driving vans for Amazon, some moving into different, different industries, whatever it might be. But I think a lot of that experience left the industry with it. And I do see a lot of over promotional people going up the ladder quite quickly and through no fault of their own, right? They're obviously great people, but that experience has gone missing. I think that's where this could play a part, where you're talking about tech help or enabling people to make better decisions based on based on data, which is, always start with the data, based on data, and actually making these people help them find a way quicker. Because I think there's a lot of wasted time, I'm sure you're aware, in hospitality. We waste a lot of time we spend a lot of time trusting our gut, which normally is the right thing to do. But I think we've got an opportunity now to do something different. And you mentioned one thing there, which I really want to talk about, dynamic pricing, because I think obviously in hotels, airlines, they've been kind of looking at working with this kind of technology for a long time. I think Weatherspoons did it here in the UK, which is mental, right? If you've ever been to Weatherspoons, anyone listening, it's kind of a real man's pub. It's really interesting. How do you see dynamic pricing kind of getting a grip on the industry, and what do you think it might do for us?
Yeah, so as I said in the introduction, I used to work at BP, and so one of my most politically sensitive jobs was running pricing for the UK, where everyone's got an opinion on petrol prices, right? And so,
yes,
boy,
my dad will be on the phone right after this.
Yeah, boy, was that a topic for conversation at every dinner party I went to. And so I guess I had some exposure to that, before I ran the network over in the US. But the interesting thing for restaurants, especially at a time right now when inflation has had its impact, of course, where we're seeing the cost of living become really challenging for many people. Food, more often than not, I don't know what this is like in the UK, but food more often than not, from an inflationary standpoint, has actually sat below food away from home, which is the grocery stores and things like that. And there's been a point in time during the pandemic where it went over. And so there's this real challenge, I think, around how people perceive value when it comes to restaurants and how they compare it to grocery stores like a Tesco's or Sainsbury's. Good example of that is, when was the last time you ordered a bottle of wine for delivery with your meal? Probably never.
Never.
Right. And you just think through that thought process for a moment. Well, I know that restaurants charge a premium when it comes to wine. I know I can get a cheaper bottle of wine when I go to the grocery store. And I know if I really wanted to go out, I could probably get the best deal by searching around for it. So the point is there's different elasticities of products depending on different circumstances. And dynamic pricing, which in many ways is a very divisive term. I blame Taylor Swift for this. More recently,
I blame her for most things in my life, but yeah.
But you think of the Ticketmaster scandals that have been going on, and the fact that when you have a scarcity of a certain amount of products, it can potentially impact the ability to price differently. Well, that you could say, well, that makes sense, Carl, when it comes to Taylor Swift or Oasis, but there are thousands of restaurants out there trying to get my business tonight. And I think that's true. So therefore, you got to think about dynamic pricing in the context of, well, how can I use this to create an experience that captures a deal for me and my restaurant relative to the other two or three that I'm competing against? And when you think of a Deliveroo, or over here, DoorDash or an Uber Eats, you're basically opening up a giant yellow pages of options. And would love to think each of our foods on our menus is distinctly different, but from our customers' eyes, they're thinking cuisine type, they're thinking speed, how fast it can get to me, and of course they're thinking price and reputation of restaurant. So all of those things play into the mix. But ultimately, if you can charge a price that allows you to get a few extra elements of margin which aren't necessarily distinctive. And when I was at Juicer, we would be doing things at 5 cents, 10 cents, 15 cents difference. Stuff that's not going to make you walk away necessarily. It's not saying we're going to charge an extra $5 for an item at a certain time of day. What we would do with that is we'd be able to test the elasticity to be able to see which products would actually generate a difference level in the demand for a particular item. That was pretty fascinating. And I mean, I know you don't have as many Costco's over there, but over here, the Costco's everywhere. And the number one item on the Costco food menu is the hot dog and Pepsi, which they've kept at $1.99 for absolutely ages. And everyone you ask that's a Costco member will always remember $1.99. But next to that on the menu, Chris, is a gelato. And I haven't got the foggiest what the price of that is. It's a little bit like if you were to ask people about a Big Mac price. I did that at a restaurant conference once at the bar, and my goodness, I had prices from anywhere from $4 to $8.
Yeah.
So everyone's got a connotation of a price, and everyone's got a price that they're willing to pay. But you're doing it in a very different context to most variable pricing environments. You can't compare this to what I suggested before around Taylor Swift tickets. You can't compare this necessarily to seats on a plane, where of course this also happens.
Yes,
there is a surplus of provision here. So I think it works both ways. It works up and it works down, and it depends on what your restaurant wants to do at certain times. For example, could you use dynamic pricing between 2 and 5 p.m. to be able to lower the prices, to be able to do things differently in that way? Could you treat this differently so that on certain nights you run a happy hour on the wines, so that way all the wines are 50% off? Right.
I think, and remember, we were doing this, think about it, 15 years ago, A-boards were coming out when I was in operations with something on the checklist, 2:00, A-board goes out because we've got to drop the price to. So we've been doing it manually for years, right? But I think the digitalization of that should be here if it's not here already. And I think having technology to really do that job for you, because that data is absolutely crucial, right? I think menus, we're getting down to the last bastions of things within hospitality that haven't really been addressed. Back of house always needs more work, I think, but pricing, menus, the way that humans behave around them, that we've all learned from kiosks over the last couple of years in the UK anyway, because it's fairly new outside of McDonald's and KFC, fairly new concept here that actually people are spending much more money in the basket through a kiosk than they are face to face, obviously, because you don't want to admit to having the third burger, right? So it's the pricing and the menu side, I think, is fascinating for what we could do to really enhance revenue in a time when everybody needs that extra buck.
It's another example of just decision-making support, because the data, the answers in the data, it's just having a system that can help manage the data and help you make the right decisions.
And on that point, this is me and you here harping on about our technology, how it's going to change the world. The reason we do this job and the reason it's so emotive and everybody loves it is because of the people, right? And the experience that we provide. I get eye rolled at a lot because of my job, because they're like, here he comes, the guy who wants to stick a kiosk everywhere. But that's really not the case, right? I spent my industry running great teams, meeting great people, and I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for that. But how do we what's the best way to protect that? You mentioned it, I think, right at the start about guest experience. How do we kind of make sure that anything we do in the back around technology or the front actually enables us to have the guests have a better time and our people to have a nice place to work as well?
One of my favorite subjects, this. So
that's why I picked it.
You cut me off when you're ready. Okay, so you mentioned kiosks, right? So kiosks help people that are in a rush, right? Or perhaps don't want to have someone listen, as you mentioned, to what they're ordering. But it also allows people to order at the front if they don't want to involve themselves with technology. You're empowering your consumers with choice, and at the same time being able to help the team at the back be more productive in creating a better guest experience. You think about drive-through AI, which has become, alongside kiosk, I think the number one and number two investments in technology in 2024. Drive-through kiosks are there because, drive-through AI is there to be able to help the capability of the people understand. If you've ever sat in a drive-through and heard the way in which people are talking into some small little microphone when it's pouring down with rain, it's a horrible experience.
Yeah.
No wonder why you get accuracy challenges, right? If it can help in being able to deal with that, if it can help by being able to speak 90 different languages and be able to allow the person that's speaking a different language to be able to provide their order, that's great, creating a better guest experience, and it's creating a better employee experience.
Yeah, and the efficiencies and all that around it as well.
Totally. In the first book, we had this chapter called Drivers Are Your New Servers. I spent a few weeks driving around for DoorDash. Boy, was I treated poorly by the restaurants. They didn't like me much at all. But the reason we wrote that chapter was to say, you've got to treat your drivers better, even though they're not your employees, because they are, for all intents and purposes, the party that is now transferring the dish from your restaurant to your guest's hands. Yes, maybe 3 miles away, but that's super important as well. So, at Kitchen United, I'd be making sure that we would be giving them samples so they could talk about new items on the menu, or let them have a cup of coffee or whatever, just so that they have something to keep them refreshed and on the road, because more drivers means you get faster deliveries. These types of ways of thinking about how you can improve the overall system, not just the customer part, but improve the employee experience, is ultimately going to create a better guest experience. The last thing I'll say is, you think about whatever your favorite restaurant experience has been, Chris. Mine, just outside of Romford, my parents, two Italian friends, ran a wonderful restaurant called Ramos. And that was the restaurant I grew up in, just spending time, seeing what hospitality was. And you would witness things. I wasn't really consciously aware of it at the time, but looking back, I would remember that they would know that my mum's favorite bottle of wine.
Yeah.
They would know that my dad would have a certain brandy after dinner, or that they were allergic to something or other. Those types of things would be little moments that would make them go, yeah, this is our restaurant. This restaurant, Ramos, they know us. And you get that at the independents, or you get that when you get the very best waiter, waitress, server give you a great experience because they remember something about you. Well, data about each of our customers is now becoming more and more plentiful. We're not handling it very well at the moment in the industry, but the more we get our grip around our data, the more we can recreate that type of experience, not just when you're in your favorite independent restaurant, but each and every time, regardless of whether you've got your best waiter or worst waitress serving any guest. Now we can actually get to a situation where we can use data to create a customizable experience, where almost, as we put in the book, you have your own personalized menu. When you go to a Taco Bell over here in the US right now, in the top right hand corner, you can tap in a little button and suddenly you have a vegetarian menu. So that, of course, isn't customizing it. You have to press a button to make that happen. But it gives you a glimmer of what I think the Amazon.co.uk type experience is for each of us, because we know your Amazon page is different to mine. Well, why shouldn't our menus be the same?
Yeah, and I totally agree with this. And I think that I was talking to someone who dined at Hawksmoor. I know they've got one in the States in New York, I think, but they're in Hawksmoor down in Shoreditch the other night. And they came in with their wife for an anniversary dinner, and they sat down. And the minute after they sat down, the waiter appeared and just said, "Hey guys, I know it's your anniversary. Come downstairs for a wine tasting." And they did it all through, I think, through 7 rooms. I think there's the tech they use. But just that, you can see the start of that happening. You can still add the human element. It doesn't have to be automated all the way through. If you're smart, and they are, you can find really great ways of doing this. And what I love about it is that actually you can access it in a single site. What was it called? Marco's? I can't remember the name of the Italian restaurant you mentioned.
Ramos.
Yeah. So you can do it in Ramos, or you can do it in KFC, right? So the tech is there now to enable people to do this personalization across the board. I think it's super exciting, and I'm obviously a big advocate of it. And I found another one, which is great. I mean, you're a bit further away than I'd like, but yeah, you're still an advocate.
Well, unfortunately, Ramos is no longer around. But
really? Well, we had one called Marco's. Weirdly, exactly the same story. As a kid in Liverpool, grew up, and Marco's was our place we used to go. Just birthday. I remember birthdays there a lot, just having that personalized experience of birthdays, just kind of being looked after, kind of wandering around the restaurant like it was ours, even though clearly it wasn't. But that kind of feeling of being welcomed. And I still think we can do that, but we have to help, right? Because the rising costs and everything are making it almost untenable to behave like that without using technology potentially to support you now. And on that, I just want to ask you about the finances, because I there was a part of the book where a lot of the challenges around, or I suppose not misconceptions, but running a delivery business is expensive, right? Or putting yourself out there and putting your brand in the domain, like you said, so that opportunity to reach more customers. But the margins and everything that the aggregators are charging is becoming, untenable again, I suppose, unless you're smart and you don't get the data and all that kind of stuff. How do you see it navigating that?
It's a challenge. Let's be honest. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge for many of the different parties that play into this system. When you take a pie that is already relatively thin crusted and try and split it across so many different parties, it makes it really difficult for the guest to get a valued experience, the driver to feel worthwhile in being able to spend their time delivering it, and the restaurant to be able to get some margin from it, while the marketplace is trying to continue to grow the exposure of the restaurant to various new customers. The opinion on this in many ways has moved a little bit over time, and it really depends on the type of restaurant that you are. If you are a restaurant that has 10 to 20% of digital sales right now, and you're not thinking about the way in which marketplaces are accessing new customers for you, then you're not necessarily thinking about this in the right way. And what I mean by that is marketplaces have spent millions and millions of pounds on being able to make sure that customers that are hungry think of their name. They're not always thinking of your restaurant's name. And so therefore, that is an opportunity for you to gain an extra customer that night that you weren't otherwise going to get. So in that context, you're already paying your rent, you're already paying your labor, and that extra sale, when you take off those two components of the rent and the labor in particular, utilities, other kind of things, you're actually going to probably get a decent return from that transaction.
Sorry, go on. You're going to talk about D2C probably, but I was going to say, yeah, how do you then convert them?
Well, so for sure, it's worthwhile thinking of that cost of the marketplace commission and probably the advertising you've had to put to it as well as a customer acquisition cost, almost like the same cost that you might put in a flyer or in a newspaper advert somewhere, thinking of it as a customer acquisition cost. But it doesn't make sense when you have to spend that out twice or three times to gain the same customer again. So that's where you then run into this piece where you're about to say the D2C or the direct cost. If someone's coming to your own app, if someone's coming to your own website, if someone's calling you up because they had a great experience from you when they first experienced you through a Deliveroo transaction, you've got to be able to do something to make them realize why they should keep coming back through your channel in the future, as opposed to just keep them going through Deliveroo. It's going to be easier. Now, the reality is that customers choose a lane. I don't have the chart with me right now, but I presented this thing at a conference, actually probably once every 3 years now. But you take some of the biggest chains, over here at least, Chick-fil-A, Taco Bell, Chipotle. They are masters in their craft when it comes to this stuff. They've spent millions and millions of dollars on it, more than the average restaurant can think about. But even if you were to look at this chart, you'd see something like 45% of transactions going through a third-party marketplace, 45% of transactions going through a first-party channel that they've developed and spent millions on, and 10% doing both. So the point there is that some customers are going to choose a lane, and you have to accommodate that in the financial weighting of what these transactions are going to mean for you. But before I move on from that, the only other thing I'll say around the direct-to-consumer piece and the website piece is you've got to make it lucrative enough for them to be able to come and purchase through your channel in the future. That second or third order needs to perhaps be a lucrative enough promotion to get them to try you. But the most important thing you have to do is to be able to get the customer data point, the mobile phone number, the email address, something that can allow you to start to develop a digital dialogue. There's a wonderful small little brand over here called Slutty Vegan. It's got hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers, and their fans of their brand talk about them all the time online. And they've been able to develop a far higher proportion of first-party transactions because they've invested in that idea of digital dialogue, the equivalent of Raymo coming over and having a chat with me at the restaurant table.
Yeah,
and now happening through social channels. So if you can invest and have the appropriate resourcing and the right capabilities to make sure you're developing a mindset of digital hospitality through digital channels, which of course, yes, are going to direct people through to your own channel, then you're going to start to grow that level of proportion. Now, let's zoom up 10,000 feet for a second. The wider challenge then becomes those people that then do that, then start to get 40 to 50% of their transactions becoming digital. That's where we're starting to run into the challenges that we exist in some of the more advanced players over here today, where actually the logic that I just explained doesn't necessarily ring true as much, because now you're actually having to invest even more into digital marketing across each of those locations to stand out. Because now what you're running up against, certainly as an independent, is all the big chains that can afford to do that. And the smaller guy isn't getting seen as much. And so the challenge when it comes to a higher level of digital mix is the wider ecosystem challenges, like how are we going to make delivery more efficient? Do we need to embrace robots and drones and different ways of making that work? My co-author runs a company called Empowered Delivery, and that's a vertically integrated software platform that is pinpointing the location of drivers that are part of your own restaurant based on their proximity to the restaurant. So I've literally seen them where the food package is being passed into the car the moment the car is pulling up.
Wow.
In like a Kaizen lean manufacturing type of system. But that can only be done with consolidated technology and creating that kind of capability across the board. And of course, again, it's done in a vertically integrated way. And that's where I think companies like Wonder that are starting to disrupt the space over here in the US are creating some interesting thoughts for what the future for delivery might look like.
I find it fascinating, actually, because I think that when I started that conversation with all the aggregators, the margins are high, everything but the reality is the cost of not having that customer is probably more expensive in the long game. And I think, and as you mentioned there, I worked for Deliverect for only 4 or 5 months over in Ghent in Belgium. And watching those guys producing tech to really service really, really big enterprise clients was super interesting on the driver tech side, because as you say, the minute you get to a scale where it's so big, all of a sudden that logistical part becomes so difficult to manage and really expensive, and you're dealing with more humans again. So because you've now got the drivers in play in that element. So yeah, I don't think there's not a one cap fits all, is there? I don't think in this scenario.
I don't think so, but I think we are heading towards a bifurcation in a decision by restaurant executives. I think you either need to determine whether you're going to be a digital restaurant, and if you're going to do that, you're going to have to think about the entire operation. You're either going to go down that path, or you're going to go to fully experiential, dine-in, less tech, but all about the experience. And we need that. We need that in our lives. But the fully digital-orientated restaurant needs to be accommodated for, much like we accommodated the build-out of our restaurants when drive-through started to become a thing in the 60s, right? Where you think about that hole in the wall that was put there, and you think about your average McDonald's now when you're driving through a McDonald's and there's fries and there's a drink 2 or 3 steps away from that window.
Yeah,
that's been designed to be able to manage that level of throughput. Well, we haven't designed our restaurants differently at this point in time to accommodate a mixture of all these different channels, and to really succeed here, we have to do that.
And those drive-throughs are really interesting, I think, especially in the UK now. They're almost they've become so busy in drive-through compared to eat-in. When I was a kid, right, you go to McDonald's, be really busy inside, no one outside really. But now it's the opposite, entirely the opposite. People just want that convenience, and these industrial parks where they're built almost feel a little bit landlocked in parts, where they've kind of got to this point where there's just queues everywhere. And because of particularly since the pandemic, the rider influx, they're now stealing spaces, obviously, to get the kind of on the bike and take their food out as well. So you've got this kind of double whammy of more people wanting convenience because they're used to it in their daily lives. And then the rider and the delivery element also putting pressure on the operations. It must be pretty tough internally, I imagine, for those guys, because that operation is slick, right? And I don't know how much more slick they can get. It must be tricky.
Well, the US is blessed with more space than the UK.
100%.
You'll see two to four or so lanes appearing in some of the drive-throughs now. And have you heard of the Chipotle lane, Chris?
Yes, I think I've seen it. Is this the one that looks like a multi-story car park? Or am I
No. That one I think is a
Taco Bell. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one to look out for. I know Chipotle lane is actually something that's being rolled out across a lot of Chipotles, which is you don't have a microphone, you don't have a menu board. You basically order via your phone, and the driver or the delivery driver rocks up to the window, and because they are tracking where you are, again, it's that seamless pass-through of the package into the car, and off you go. So you're now creating different types of drive-through lanes, right? One which is actually dedicated for the UX of a D2C kind of customer or driver, and the other for a customer that hasn't figured out what they want when they drive up through the traditional drive-through lane. So all of these things are positioning to be able to make things more and more convenient for our guests. And the more we can do that and channel that type of experience through a first-party experience, the more reason you're going to be able to say, well, actually, this makes sense for me to use that versus perhaps going down another path.
Brilliant chat. I love it. I think I'll probably spend an hour and a half talking to you. But I suppose looking ahead to the future, what's the next step? So if I'm going to, or some of these guys, do you work generally with kind of, mid-market over here is 20 to 30 sites, I suppose. In the States, that might be slightly different. And enterprise, I know, is different. But what's the next big leap, I suppose, for these guys in terms, we might have talked about it a bit there in terms of those lanes. What do you think the next step will be for really digitalizing restaurants? I think in the UK, while we're mature, I think we've got a long journey to go on, 100%. I think there's a lot of untangling to do. I think there's a lot of legacy tech in the UK. Is it the same over there? What's the next step for digital?
Yeah, it is a similar story over here. Look, The biggest thing holding back innovation is what I call data entanglement. Even for the world I'm in, right? When I'm selling to restaurants, typically for Invisible, we're positioning ourselves for 100 plus chains, and that's largely because we handle highly voluminous processes that are repetitive, which can perhaps be done through AI. But in terms of restaurants and what they need to untangle this data, whether it be transactional data or customer data. And the problem that why we have this is that the average restaurant group today has 15 to 20 different pieces of technology. And they all say they can do different things, but the problem is they don't talk to each other.
No.
And so I'm speaking to a restaurant group right now that has GMs sat in their office for 45 minutes every week, taking data from this system, from that system, and from this other one over here, and putting it into another system so that they can save some money on a scheduling tool. That gives you an idea of the complexity we're adding into our businesses as a result of digitization. How is that trying to be addressed? Well, there's a lot of consolidation happening. I'm sure you've seen that happening in your part of the world too. The problem with that is that a marketing play, or are they actually then going to invest in making sure the acquired systems that are being consolidated into a larger organization actually talk to each other, right? That's a part of it. I actually think this comes back to the world of AI, quite honestly, because AI, if you think about what all of my company's been training 5 of the 7 leading large language models in the world. And so you think about how that's come about. You've got all these folks that are training these systems. And if they're training these systems and labeling them in a certain way, well, it's exactly the same when you think about it from a digital data record standpoint inside a restaurant. So I think what we're going to get to is a place where we start to disentangle the data. Yes, some of it's going to come from consolidating different systems, but part of it's going to come from being able to deploy this capability set to be able to avoid us having the GMs in the office. If we can get the GMs out of the office, doing less of the dull tasks, we're helping a retailer right now with interview processes. If we're helping them with those processes, like I mentioned, where you're taking data from these different parts and pulling them together, and we're getting the GM out of the office and putting them in front of their teams more, which, by the way, when you look at the companies that do that really well, like Chick-fil-A, for example, over here, that have much lower churn rates of their teams, why does that happen? Well, they make sure their owners are present in their locations, right? Where they are given that level of leadership, where they do dictate that you have to spend a certain amount of time on the floor, that you're not in the office. Well, if we can create a culture in our industry where we've got less people in the office and more people in front of their teams, and of course in front of their guests, well, guess what? We get back to what we talked about all the way through this: a much better hospitality environment, a better experience for our guests, and ultimately better decisions being made across the organizations that we service.
Brilliant. I mean, yeah. If anyone hasn't got the book, they need to get it. What was the second book called? Sorry, just
they're both under the name Delivering the Digital Restaurant.
Right. Okay.
The second book is called The Path to Digital Maturity, and so that one is more of a how-to. It talks through finding yourself where you are on this pathway to becoming digitally mature. It talks. The last chapter is actually directed towards the technologists to be able to say, guys, we need to help these guys out, because otherwise they're going to keep in this world of pain. But hopefully, the folks that read that second book will find themselves on that path and say, okay. And then at the end of each chapter, there's a list of questions that we encourage each owner, executive to ask their teams, to say, answer these questions and see, do you have the answers? Because if not, you're not ready to move on to the next chapter.
Amazing. Look, Carl, it's been super fascinating talking to you. I know you're at the start of your day over there and you're about to go and probably have this conversation 15 times with different people around how they can untangle their data. But look, if people want to get hold of you and reach out, actually, particularly around Invisible, that's super, and the dynamic pricing, which I thought was super interesting. How do they get hold of you?
Well, certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn. Do take a note of that rather odd last name of mine, Orsbourn, if you want to be phonetically correct. Reminds me
I said Osborne. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're right. I'd say the same. It reminds me of that Hyacinth Bucket Bouquet. You remember that show?
Yes, I do remember. Yes.
But yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Feel free to check out the digital.restaurant if you want to learn more about the 2 books. Obviously, the books are on Amazon. You get me to read it to you on Audible. We also have our own podcast, Chris, called The Digital Restaurant. So every couple of weeks.
I do know that, because Sarah's been subscribing to you. She was my old director. She told me so. Yeah,
and that just touches on 5 headlines of things happening. We don't have guests on like your format. It's more talking about things that are happening in the space that might be worthwhile getting a bite-sized view on.
Love that. Brilliant. Look, thank you very much. I'm presuming the weather's great over there, and you're looking forward to a lovely weekend in California.
You don't want to know? Do you really want to know? I mean, I can tell you the weather, but it's sun.
Go on. Why don't you just depress us a little bit?
23, 24 degrees, sunshine. I'll be on the beach playing volleyball Saturday morning. If you're down in Orange County area, California, come down and we'll have a game.
Do you know what? I am coming over for a conference, but not California. I think we're going to New York. So at the RF, I can't remember what it's called now. There's a restaurant retail show or something in January in New York. So we'll be there. But
NRF,
that's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, very good. Are you going to be there?
I might be there. I'm debating. I
Non-committal.
travel so much for my work. So I would like to be there. So if I can, we'll have to definitely catch up then.
Perfect. Look, that was Carl, everybody. Go and check him out. The Delivering the Digital Restaurant is on Amazon and various other places. You can find him on LinkedIn. That was the Tech on Toast podcast. And everyone have a great day. Say bye, Carl.
Bye, Carl.